Hi everyone, it's Nico, Dr. Nicola Rinaldi, author of No Period, Now What? I'm going to start with a quick intro, just to give people a chance to join. So first, obviously, here is my book, No Period, Now What? I don't want this to be about pushing me or my book or anything, but I just want to give you guys a sense of the resources that are available to you. So this book is 550 pages of just about everything that I know about HA and recovery and getting pregnant and life after pregnancy or life after recovery. There's a ton of information in here. So if you don't already have this, I really, really suggest you pick it up. I've been posting about the different sections on Instagram, so you can get a sense of what's really in there. So much info. Like most of the questions that are asked in the Facebook groups and whatever are answered in this book. And there's some cool things in here that you may or may not know about. So at the back of the book is the list of all the references. And at the very, very back, if you have the paperback, is an index. So if you have any questions, I'm really doing poorly with this camera and getting things lined up. But if you have any questions, like, hey, I'm wondering about Clomid, just go to the index and look it up. I spent a long time on that because I thought it would be really useful for people. If you have the ebook, all of the links to the references, like if you click on the little number in the text, it'll go directly to the reference in the back. If you click on the author's name, it'll put you back to where you were, because I always find that really annoying when you have to like scroll back to find it. And then if you click on the DOI link, that'll take you to the actual reference in your browser, so you can learn more from there. So that's the book. I have a ton of information on my blog. I really suggest you check it out if you haven't already. I will post links to some of the relevant posts as I'm going through and answering questions, because there's really so much information on there. Little things about supplements, other sort of data analysis that I've done since publishing the book. Another thing is I have a Patreon site. I put some draft blog posts on there. Like if I'm looking up something for somebody, I'm like, I might as well put it, put the information somewhere. It's also a nice way to support me. If you're finding value from the Facebook support groups, I do have Facebook support groups for those of you who may not know. noperiod.info/support is the link for the main one. But anyway, I have a Patreon site, so that's a nice way to support me and my work if you feel so inclined. And also you can check out a bunch of the draft posts. I have things on caffeine and HA recovery, alcohol, a bunch of stuff about fertility, uterine lining, all that kind of stuff. They're not like polished posts yet, which is why I haven't put them on my regular blog. That is www.patreon.com/noperiodnowwhat. And then finally, I work with women one-on-one. This is something that I absolutely love doing. I love chatting with women, kind of going through their history, figuring out like what are the chances of getting their periods back? What things do they need to work on? I can recommend supplements. I can recommend ways to change your lifestyle that will work for you, because I think that's really super important in trying to recover from HA, is that we are all different. And it's so important to realize that we're all different in how we got to HA in the first place, and we are all different in how we recover. So you can't look at somebody else's journey and be like, oh, I'm going to be just like her. It doesn't work like that. So I could really work with you to help you tailor your own personal recovery and, find things that'll work for you to get you your period back. So all of that said, I'm going to get started with questions. I have 26 questions, so I'm hoping that I will be able to get through them all. And I just really want to share with you guys that I love this work. It makes me so happy to work with women on recovering periods and getting their health back, and, just everyone learning about how, like, the whole diet culture thing about how you have to continually undereat and exercise all the time is just such bullshit. And, you can have so much more free a life when you just eat what you want and exercise because you enjoy it, not because you have to or you're going to be unfit or anything like that. So I'm going to get started. So the first two questions actually come, they're quite similar. They're from Sarah and Amy. So Sarah asks, for those in a normal size body whose doctors say they don't have HA because they don't fit the criteria, what are some ways that they could possibly sway their doctors? And then Amy asks how we can educate doctors and make this more talked about. So I do have an information sheet that is available on my blog, just on a main post about well, it's one of my main posts about HA. I'll type the link in right now, noperiod.info /HA. And on there, I do have an information sheet that is just a simple one-pager, and it's got a lot of the a lot of the stats. Oh, this is ridiculous. Sorry. I'm trying to type /HA and it keeps putting in a friend's name instead. So yeah, that's not going to work. Anyway, so noperiod.info /HA is a place where you can download the information sheet, or if you're in my Facebook group, you can download it in the files area. So that's just a simple one-pager that has a bunch of the graphs from No Period Now What that share things like the BMI range of people who have HA, which I think many doctors find surprising because they expect that only women who are in teeny tiny bodies or exercising hours and hours a day will lose their periods. And even the exercise part, like they often don't recognize, even if somebody is exercising a ton, they often don't recognize that that could be a causative factor for losing their period. They just say, oh, you're fit, that's why you've lost your period. It's like, no, it's because you're probably under fueling, and possibly the cortisol from your high intensity exercise is also affecting you. So how can we educate doctors? Share that information sheet. I think the more we can share about this condition on social media and just generally get the word out. I love, there's been an explosion in the past 5 to 10 years of people posting, hey, I'm missing my period, what can I do? And other people posting and sharing their stories. And I think that's really fantastic. And so the more we can get the word out, the better. So if you feel comfortable posting on social media about your missing period, then by all means, go ahead and do it. And, I think you might be scared at first, but I think you'll probably find that the response is pretty positive. And it can really help to be open about it. I really think our periods are something that we should talk about more and more and more. Not talking about them is just, it makes some people uncomfortable, typically men. It's like, what? It's such a vital part of our health that I think it's really important that we do talk about it with each other. And, let's make the guys aware of what's going on too. They need to know this stuff too. So if anyone else has ideas about how to educate doctors and get the word out to them, that would be awesome. I'm looking into trying to give talks at a couple of the big reproductive medicine conferences in the next few years, so hopefully that will help too. Okay, so getting into some more HA-related questions. Caitlin asks, why are some women more susceptible than others with seemingly similar profiles, like eating the same, exercising the same, what have you? So there can be a couple of reasons here. One of them, as we talk about in the book, is just our genetics. We're all different. I mean, if you think about doing 23andMe or what have you, you come out with hundreds of thousands of the single nucleotide polymorphisms, and I'm willing to bet that a bunch of those are in the proteins and the hormones that affect our reproductive cycles. So, if you have some small mutation that makes your protein not able to bind to a hormone as well as the next person's, that might make you susceptible to HA. So that's sort of the genetic factor. And then there's also an interesting an interesting study that I found a couple of years ago, or the study was done a couple of years ago. So this was done in Sweden, and the researchers looked at two groups of women and they were ostensibly eating the same amount, about 3,500 calories a day, and exercising the same amount, about 1,000 calories a day, so a net of 2,500 calories, which should be fantastic. Some of the women had their periods and some of them didn't. And what they found when they looked sort of at a more micro level at what women were eating and when they were exercising, they found that those who did not have their periods were in an energy deficit for 4 hours more per day. So if you look on the surface, they're eating the same amount, they're exercising the same amount, you would say, oh, they should all have their periods or not. But the women who did not have their periods, their systems were just suppressed much more because they were, they had to burn through their glycogen and then they had to burn through their other energy stores. And so their hypothalamus was suppressed. So I do have a blog post on that one. It's noperiod.info /energy balance. Typing and talking at the same time is a bit of a challenge, I find. Okay, there we go. So that could be a reason. If you are somebody who wakes up in the morning and you go for a run or you go for a walk, and then you might have some coffee, and then you go to work, and maybe you have your breakfast a couple hours later, that means your body is now in an energy deficit from all of the work it was doing while you were sleeping, which includes pumping your blood and breathing and sending energy to your brain and all the repairs and stuff that your cells are doing. So that all took energy while you're sleeping, and then you wake up and you're doing your exercise. That's burning more calories. You're walking around, even more. So you end up in quite a big energy deficit, and then you're kind of clawing your way back from that all day long. So I really recommend for recovery that you try and eat sort of first thing when you get up in the morning, and spread your food out through the day. Eat right before you go to bed, because the more you can keep your hypothalamus happy, you really need to baby it during this time, the better off you're going to be. Okay, next question from Shedding a Light 17. Does every loss of period mean HA, and is it always reversible with these principles? So I would say no, every loss of period does not mean HA. There are a number of other possibilities that I talk about in the diagnosis chapter of No Period, Now What? It can be something like Asherman syndrome, which is where you have scarring inside your uterus. This is particularly after a potential uterine injury. It can happen after birth. It can happen if you have a DNC after a miscarriage. That kind of thing. The PCOS can lead to missing periods. That's another thing I have a whole chapter on in the book, and that is available as a free download, because I think it's super important that women understand whether they do have HA or PCOS. HA, or hypothalamic amenorrhea, is often misdiagnosed as PCOS. So that you can find at noperiod.info, and I made a typo in the previous link I posted. So that's noperiod.info/HAVS-PCOS. That's where you can find that information, or in the book, chapter 6. So yeah, and there could be other things as well. If you have a pituitary microadenoma that secretes prolactin, the prolactin suppresses your reproductive hormones, just like when you're breastfeeding. And so that can be another cause for a missing period. So I do think it's important that you go and see a doctor, get some blood work done, have some of these possibilities checked out. If you sort of meet the factors in HA, which is exercising a bunch, probably under eating, maybe you've lost weight sometime in the past, you might have a high stress level from things like counting calories, or monitoring your macros, and your Fitbit, and all of that stuff, as well as genetics, then it's kind of likely that you have HA, but it is important to rule out some of these other possible causes, and you should find a doctor who knows what they're doing and can do that. So El Savageau asks, she has normal LH, and but still no cycle. She's wondering what the possibilities are there. So there's a figure in the book about LH levels. So I think it's about 20% of women do have sort of really quote unquote normal levels, which I define as 5 or more. A lot of doctors will say, to women with HA, oh, your hormones are all normal, but their LH level is like 2 or 3, so it's kind of barely normal. And I don't see that in women who don't have HA. So I think that can be that can really be a warning sign. If you do have normal LH and you still don't have a cycle, it's not that your baseline hormones aren't super suppressed. You might just need a little bit of a push to get your hypothalamus started, and that could come in the form of perhaps soy isoflavones or Clomid or Femara. We'll talk about those a little bit more towards the end of the recovery section. But sort of you can absolutely have HA with like totally normal looking hormones. And there must be some other marker, and we don't really know what that is. Sex hormone binding globulin is one that there was a recent paper that found that it tends to be high in women with HA, so that may be a better marker, but we don't have enough data for that to be something that's a common recommendation yet. So okay, so getting a little bit more. That's actually for Sid. She's had a DEXA that showed osteopenia, and her doctor wants her to go on estrogen. Is that necessary, and will it potentially help or hurt with recovery? And also chances of getting pregnant. We'll talk about that later when we talk about getting pregnant. So This is a tough question. I mean, obviously, our bones are really important. And if we don't have a cycle, then we do not have the hormones that are supporting bone density increase or anything like that. So, sometimes if you know you have osteopenia, it's not a horrible idea to go on estrogen and progesterone for a few months while you work toward recovery. So eating more, exercising less. You're not going to get some of the feedback from your body that you might get if you're not on the hormones. But at the same time, you do have the estrogen, and hopefully your doctor would have you on progesterone as well, and possibly testosterone, to support the bone density, at least staying the same. Because if you don't have anything, then it's, with HA, it's possible you would be losing bone density during this time. So it's, I think it's a pretty reasonable idea, if you know you have low bone density, to be on those hormones for maybe 4 to 6 months while you work on recovery. 6 months is 5 to 6 months is about the median time to recovery. So, then going off those hormones for a couple months at that time to see if you have, if you can have a natural cycle at that point. And if you don't, then, maybe trying, like, once your body is really in a good place, you are weight restored, you're eating freely, you've cut out your high intensity exercise for the time being, then trying something like Clomid or Femara to give your hypothalamus a push to start your natural cycles is not, it's a reasonable thing to do, especially if you know you have low bone density, because the hormones from your menstrual cycle can be really helpful in sort of increasing that bone density. Weight gain helps too. So that's another thing that's important to know. There's a really interesting study where they looked at weight gain versus period restoration versus both. So they had women in each of those groups, and they found some increases in bone density in those who simply gained weight but did not get their periods back. Some increases in bone density in those who got their periods but did not gain weight, and much better bone density increases in those who did both, gain weight and got their periods back. So there's definitely bonuses to both, and so I would encourage you to to take the necessary steps to hopefully get both going. Okay, so getting a little bit more into recovery, Nikki Petru asks, any tips for increasing appetite and overcoming fullness, bloating, and nausea? So this can be a tricky one if you're used to, over time, underfueling and ignoring your hunger signals. I know I did that when I was in the midst of my HA. I decided I was only allowed to eat X number of calories a day. And so if I was hungry at a time that did not fit in that eating schedule, then I was like, too bad, I'm just not going to eat. And I think over time we can, our body just stops making those hormones because A, it takes energy to make the hormones, and B, you're not listening to them. So why bother? So I think in recovery, one of the things you have to do to start with is push yourself to eat more than you feel comfortable with. So some ways to do this are, my friend Cindy Donovan has a great post on high calorie ways to, ways to increase your calorie without increasing your volume that much, which I think is really helpful. So things like adding salad dressing to your salad, nut butters, things that are really calorically dense, so you can get a lot of energy out of them, but they don't take up a lot of volume in your stomach. So that's another thing is, I know that a lot of people who get HA are, sort of following the clean eating mindset, lots of fruits and vegetables, maybe cutting out carbs. One of the issues with that is that fruits and vegetables take up a huge amount of space in your stomach, and they have very little energy in them. So, you can eat an enormous salad and feel super full, but you haven't actually eaten very many calories. So that's another way to sort of decrease or overcome the fullness, bloating, nausea, is cut out the fruits and vegetables. I know that's totally against everything that nutritionists will tell you, but all of this is for the short term, and it really makes a big difference to all of those feelings. If you decrease, if you cut your salad in half, that means you've got a lot more room for adding, say, some chicken or some, avocado, or, other, add some nuts on there, lots of salad dressing. And just the vegetables often seem to, because they're high fiber and they've got stuff in them, I don't know, you eat a ton of broccoli, you might not feel great. So that's one thing that I found that actually really helps people. And it seems totally counterintuitive and unhealthy, but I think that a lot of us take sort of the fruit and vegetable thing maybe a little bit too far. And so pulling back on that and maybe adding in some carbs can really help. So carbs, they are super important for our hormones, and I know they're vilified right now, especially sugar, but I think there's this big like black and white thing around nutrition that I think is not very helpful to us. It's like somebody does a study and they find that in this group of people, 10% more got diabetes when they ate 25% sugar, and all of a sudden it's like, sugar is awful, sugar is going to kill you, sugar is toxic, you should never eat any of it. It's like, there's like this whole dose response curve. I mean, if you look at it, anything that you eat 100% of the time is probably not going to be very healthy, and you're probably not going to feel great. So if you ate sugar all day, every day, and nothing else, yeah, you're probably not going to be healthy. But if you ate carrots all day, every day, and nothing else, then you're also probably not going to be healthy. So I think it's important to keep in mind that there's gray in the middle, and like living in the gray is a much better place to be. It's much less, you're much less fearful around your food. So yeah, just like keep in mind that it's the old saying, it's the dose that makes the poison. So I think adding back some carbs if you're on a low carb diet can also be really helpful in a sort of period recovery and maybe making you feel better when you eat. Next question is from Andor for Julia. Advice for someone doing a lot of traveling where it's hard to build a routine around eating. I think this is actually a great time to just be free with your eating. You don't have to be in a routine. I think as long as you're eating throughout the day, whatever you are eating, it doesn't really matter. Eat some carbs, eat some fat, eat some protein. I know that traveling can be a little bit stressful on your body, but just eat and relax and enjoy what you're seeing, and try not to think too much about your missing period, because that can be stressful and that's not necessarily helpful. So I think often women will tend to get their periods back or ovulate when they travel because they're out of their norm, and sometimes it's actually easier to eat different foods when you're not at your own refrigerator and your own stove and used to doing the same old thing over and over again. Okay, Nikki Petru again asks, are you allowed to use a Fitbit to track steps or have a step goal? I highly encourage you not to focus on numbers as little as possible. So that means don't weigh yourself. I mean, if you really think about it, what value do you get out of weighing yourself? I really can't think of any. Like stepping on that scale every morning. What it does do is it gets that number in your head, and it's just there all day. And so you're thinking about it and you're thinking, oh, the scale went up a bit. Maybe I shouldn't eat so much. It's just there. Even if if you don't super care about it, the number is still in your head. So no weighing yourself. Calorie tracking. I know in the book we talk about 2,500 calories, and that's all over the Facebook group. But again, it's a number. It gets stuck in your head. You feel like you have to meet that. So that's why we say, track for a day or two to see how much you're getting. Make sure you're kind of getting around that number, and then stop. Just focus on, what you need to eat. If you're under eating. You just have to kind of watch it and just be careful and just do that, and not focus so much on, am I getting exactly 2,500? Like if you get one day you get 2,400 and one day you get 2,600, or you get 2,000 and 3,000, like it's all going to even out. It's going to be okay. So I think like any strong focus on numbers is just not really helpful. And that definitely goes for Fitbits and step trackers and all of that too. It's a number. It niggles at you. Like if you've always been somebody that's gotten 10,000 steps in a day, and you walk around the couch while you're watching television to make sure you get your steps in. Like even if you decide, oh, I don't need to have quite such a high goal, it's still a number, and you're still focusing on that. Your watch is beeping when you get to X number of steps. So while you're recovering, like just get rid of it. There's no real purpose to that, because there's no benefit to getting a particular number of steps while you're working on recovery. It's, if you feel like going for a walk, go for a walk. If you don't feel like going for a walk, you can sit on the couch and watch Netflix. That's totally cool too. All right, so talking a little bit more about exercise. So Ajwali says, what do you recommend for exercise? And, if you're normal body size or what have you, and in particular saying that it's hard to look around and see other people who are able to exercise while you can't. So we have a whole chapter in No Period Now What about exercise and our recommendations and some of the studies that kind of support what our recommendations are. And that includes the survey that I did of about 300 women, just kind of trying to find out what they did during recovery. And I was actually really surprised when I did that survey because I sort of suspected that it was going to be any and all exercise would be detrimental to getting your period back. I had in the survey divided exercise into high intensity and low intensity, and I was really surprised to find that it was only the high intensity exercise that seemed to affect cycle recovery. So in general, we recommend cutting out high intensity exercise. So that's exercise like running or cycling, or, for me, it was ice hockey, anything that's getting your heart rate up to sort of 60, 70% of your max. There was a nice study that was done where they showed they had people exercise at different exercise levels compared to their maximum. There was no change in cortisol levels, obviously for no exercise, up through about 40% of maximum intensity. And then they definitely saw changes in cortisol and other stress markers at 60 and 80% of max intensity. So that's why I think walking tends to be fine, because you typically aren't getting your heart rate up that high. And it really seems to be intensity related that you then get the cortisol, which then suppresses your hypothalamus. And while it may not necessarily cause amenorrhea, it definitely seems to prevent recovery. So, you can certainly try recovering your period by just eating more and not cutting exercise. But I will tell you that in many women, they end up finding that they do have to cut out their high intensity exercise in order to recover. I know this can be challenging for people whose livelihood depends on their exercise, like maybe college athletes or what have you. So then it's sort of more about like, okay, in the off season, you really, really have to rest. And then when you get back on season again, making absolutely sure that you are fully fueling your body, eating every couple of hours, make sure you work with a dietitian who can make sure that you're getting the number of calories that you really, really need. In that situation, it might be hard to recover your period until your season is over, or until your career is, your competitive career is over. It's hard to say, but definitely doing what you can is always helpful. So Nikki also asks, for small women, 2,500 calories is virtually impossible. Can I eat less? And what about if I reduce my exercise? So yeah, we do have a table in No Period Now What that kind of gives slightly different calorie recommendations depending on body size, because it makes no sense that somebody who's 5 foot tall needs the same amount of calories as somebody who's 6 feet tall. Like, obviously there's difference in body sizes. So if you're 5 feet tall, then, maybe you need 2,300. And if you're really, really just sitting on your bum all day, you might need a little bit less than that. But there's not really going to be negatives from eating a little bit more. So again, I encourage you not to focus super hard on the actual number of calories, but it's more about increasing your intake and making sure that you are getting enough food, all different types of food, and eating throughout the day. And obviously, like we talked about before, the more you can increase calories by just adding calories and not necessarily volume, that makes it way easier. So, to say 2,500 calories is virtually impossible, that's what 12 tablespoons of peanut butter, that's not that hard. So I think, if you really focus on sort of foods that are very calorie dense, then, you will have an easier time getting those calories in there. And again, like this can be, it doesn't have to be like, today I decided I want to recover, and so therefore I have to do everything right away. For some people, especially if you want to get pregnant, it's like, yeah, you want to do everything you can immediately. If you're not, if if it's not like you want to get pregnant tomorrow, which is often the case when we decide we want to get pregnant, you can take a little bit, you can take smaller steps in a way that feels comfortable for you. And that's where, that's where I can really help you if we're working together, because, I can help you kind of think through, okay, these are all the changes that I need to make, and which one should I start with? What's gonna feel good for me right now? That said, recovery is uncomfortable. It's hard to change our thought patterns and everything like that. So, you're gonna have to step out of your comfort zone and learn some new coping techniques, and that kind of thing. So, okay, Kel in the zone has an interesting question. She said she stopped getting her period with serious stress, and it came back with a new relationship and sex. So that's actually an interesting one. It's not the first time I've heard that. I think when we start a new relationship, there can be, there's a lot of hormonal changes that can go along with that, and clearly our body can be happy, and so that can definitely have a positive effect. I don't think it's just sex in general. I think it's more like the change, just because, obviously many of us who were in longer term relationships, like the sex didn't have any impact on our recovery. So anyway, let's see. Emily asks, I've been all in for 4 months, but no period yet. Should I push myself to eat more or just hang out and wait it out? So I would really recommend that you read the Still No Period chapter in No Period Now What. Part of it is just time. Like, it's really hard, especially in our Facebook group, when you see some women recover in 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and you're like, why is that not me? It's so unfair. But again, like, you cannot compare your journey to anybody else's. We are all different in how we got to HA, and we're all different in how we get out. So I would typically recommend, wait till at least 6 months before you start thinking about doing other things. I mean, of course, you have to ensure that you really are eating enough, because sometimes we fool ourselves. I think we're actually often really good at that. So if you've been 4 months and you haven't gotten a period, like, maybe do a sanity check. Like, one day do track your calories, or like count them up at the end of the day and see, where you're really at. If you're still doing some exercise, maybe you want to slow down a bit more. Some women do find that they have to completely stop all added movement in order to get their periods back. So there are women in the Facebook group who will tell you they did have to stop walking. Again, all our journeys are different. So if you haven't gotten your period back in 4 months, you could just wait. You could reduce walking or yoga or other movement that you're doing. You could eat more. It's not going to be a bad thing, for sure. And then there are some other ideas in the Still No Period chapter. Little Firm Kitchen asks, what does spotting mean in early recovery cycles? Is it bad? She had spotting 28 to 30 days apart, and then ovulated 14 days after the last episode. So this is actually, it seems to happen to a few people that as their bodies sort of start working towards recovery, their hormones do start to cycle a little bit. And so they might get a little spotting, and it might be 28 to 30 days apart. I take that as a really good sign. Like any changes in cervical mucus, spotting, you might feel cramping, like all of that is a good sign. And particularly things that happen in a regular pattern, like follicular waves, tend to occur about 2 weeks apart. So that's where your body is trying to grow a follicle, and maybe it doesn't quite get big enough, so it regresses, and then 2 weeks later, the next batch of follicles kind of tries to grow. So for me, when I was, after my first son was born, this happened. I think I had 3 waves of egg white mucus 2 weeks apart before I finally ovulated. So anything like that that's happening on a regular basis, I think, is a great sign, and it means you're pretty close, and your body's probably going to get there. Maybe you want to push to eat a little bit more, maybe cut your exercise to really baby your hypothalamus and get it to a point where it feels safe and secure to really have that first recovery cycle. So yeah, but definitely not bad. Okay, then there are a couple of questions about supplements. So In general, what I have found is that there are a lot of supplements that are recommended to women. There's very little evidence for most of them in the medical literature. So it's like, oh, person X took maca and got her period back 3 days later. So therefore, maca is great for recovery of periods. And it's like, I don't really buy it. It's like she could have gotten her period anyway. So the one supplement that there is evidence for is acetyl L-carnitine, or ALC. So this is, my post about this is at noperiod.info/ALC. There were 3 studies that were done that found a recovery rate of about 70% in women with low LH levels. So that's less than 3, who took 1 to 2 grams of acetyl L-carnitine per day. This is an adjunct to recovery. Any supplement is an adjunct to recovery. None of this can make up for under eating or over exercising or super stress or anything like that. So, it's something that could help. In the case of ALC, there's no evidence that it's going to be detrimental. There's some stuff in the literature about possibly not being good with thyroid issues, but when I looked into that, there were studies that were done in women with thyroid issues with ALC and no adverse events reported. So I'm not really sure where that came from. That information is actually in the comments on that blog post. So if you have a thyroid issue and you're curious, you can check that out. So how long is it recommended to take ALC? The studies that were done did it for 3 to 6 months. So, I think that's a reasonable time frame. Women who have gotten their periods back while on ALC, I usually tell them, maybe keep taking it for a little while, then cut your dose in half until you've finished your bottle, and then you can stop. So yeah, I mean, it can be a good adjunct to recovery, possibly, especially if you have low LH. If you have normal LH, there was about a 30% recovery rate in women with LH above 3 in the studies. So yeah, that's, something you can think about. You can look at the information on the blog post and, see what you think. Kate asks about the effectiveness of soy isoflavones after about 6 months work towards recovery. So this is an interesting question. So this soy isoflavones, Clomid and Femara, all kind of work in the same way. What they do is they have your brain sense a lower level of estrogen, which by some mechanism gets your hypothalamus to increase the GnRH pulses, the gonadotropin releasing hormone pulses, and that then increases the amount of follicle stimulating hormone, which makes a follicle grow and the egg inside it mature. As the egg grows and matures, it secretes estradiol, which thickens your uterine lining. That's something I had a recent post about, is a lot of doctors will say, oh, your uterine lining is thin, things aren't going to work. Well, your uterine lining will thicken as you have a follicle growing with the estradiol increasing. When the estradiol gets to a threshold level, it triggers a surge of luteinizing hormone, which makes you ovulate. And then after ovulation, the follicle that is burst becomes a corpus luteum, which secretes progesterone. That degrades in about 2 weeks, and then you get your period. So what I really like about these meds is that they work with your natural hormonal system. So it's basically, they're just giving you a push, and then everything else that happens is your own hormones doing the work. So is it going to work if you have not worked towards recovery at all? Probably not. And that's why a lot of doctors will say, oh, those drugs don't work in women with HA. But if you have put in work towards recovery, if you've been eating more and exercising less for 3 to 6 months, then it's absolutely reasonable to try these drugs. And particularly if you want to get pregnant, but also in somebody who's put in the work towards recovery for, I would say if you're not trying to get pregnant, I would give natural recovery at least 6 months. But then, yeah, giving a push with Clomid or Femara is not a horrible idea. I'm not anti-med. I think it can So there was a study that was published in 2007 where they did 3 rounds. This information is also all in No Period Now What. They did 3 rounds of Clomid in a group of women. It's only 8 women, small study, but all 8 of them recovered their natural cycles afterwards. And I've worked with people who have done the same. So you do the 3 rounds of Clomid, and then you can keep cycling naturally afterwards. So I think it's because what happens in your cycle is you have all these hormones that kind of follow after each other in a cascade. And so once that cascade is going, it kind of wants to stay going again because the hormones are all working together. So if you start restricting again or you pick up your exercise, then that can prevent your natural cycles from starting or continuing. But it's certainly, I've seen it happen quite a lot. So I think that that's certainly something to keep in your arsenal. As far as the isoflavones, they work in the same way as Clomid, but they are not as strong. So in the book, I say they're probably not going to work if you haven't already recovered cycles. At that point, they can potentially be used to shorten cycles. But, I mean, if you want to give it a try, I'm not going to tell you not to, particularly if you have a doctor who's not willing to prescribe Clomid or Femara just for cycle regaining. It might be something to try. If you do that, I would suggest doing it about 28 days apart. So take them for 5 to 10 days. See if you ovulate, and if you don't, then take them again 28 days apart. Again, trying to kind of mimic your natural hormonal cycle, which tends to be 28 days long. If you have periods of egg white mucus but you're still not getting your actual period, too many periods in there, then it's nice to kind of try and work with how your natural cycle is going when you slot in the Clomid or Femara or isoflavones, so that you're kind of augmenting what your natural hormones are doing as opposed to like trying to fight them. So sort of think about if I have egg white, when would I ovulate? When would I then get my period? And then kind of time the meds off that. Okay, Jennifer asks, if you've had a couple of periods but still underweight, are you getting the full benefit of the hormones? So I kind of answered this earlier when I talked about the study in women who gained weight or got their periods, and the bone density increases were not as good in those who both gained weight and got their periods. So if you're still underweight, if you're not sort of at what is probably your body's happy weight, like let's say like me, I was, going along and then I decided to go on this massive diet, lost a bunch of weight. My happy weight is where I started. Like that's where my body actually wanted to be. So for me, getting back to that place was a little bit more, which is not uncommon. Blog post on that is noperiod.info/activate. Anyway, I'm losing my train of thought here. But yeah, so if you're still underweight, then definitely I would strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to continue to work on gaining, even if you've gotten your period back, because the period is not really the end game here. The end game is having a life where you're happy and fully fueled. And it's not just about your menstrual cycle. It's about fully fueling your brain so you can think, and your immune system, and your bones, and your hair, and your nails. And, if you're still underweight, then chances are you're probably still not eating enough to support all of that and all of the things that your body wants to do. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to keep working on gaining, even if you get your period back when you're still underweight. Okay, I have just a few more minutes because my mom is coming soon, and unfortunately she has Alzheimer's, so she's not really okay with being by herself. So anyway, I will try and get through these quickly. So Ellie Rose Matthews says she's gained weight, she's eating loads, but still had a rubbish response to injectables. And is that the fact that her cycles haven't come back a bad sign for IVF? And Melissa asks something similar. I think it was Melissa, no, somebody else, but that's actually when working on recovery without a period, is there still a chance that oral meds will work? So I think definitely working towards recovery is going to help with fertility treatment response, no matter what. I mean, I've seen so many women who do have rubbish response to injectables when they are still underweight, and working towards recovery is only going to help with that. if you're having a rubbish response to injectables and you've been doing all of that, then maybe you think about trying the oral meds or something different. Naltrexone is something that I talk about in the book. It's a completely different pathway, way to get women to ovulate, so that might be something to look into if the gonadotropins aren't working. Melissa asks, is she hindering recovery by doing fertility treatments at the same time hormonally? I would say no. About half of the women in my survey for my book did fertility treatments. They worked towards recovery and then did some fertility treatments without having gotten their periods back. The vast majority did start cycling again after pregnancy. So, I haven't seen any detrimental effects to using fertility treatments if you've worked on recovery and you haven't gotten your period back in a time frame that's sort of works for you in terms of when you want to get pregnant, if that makes sense. Okay, Sarah asks about consistently short luteal phases and any measures that can be taken in consistently long follicular phases, and can this be normal and any issue with getting pregnant? These are all addressed in No Period Now What, so there's a whole chapter on luteal phase, and I actually have a blog post on the long follicular phase with the short luteal phase, which is noperiod.info/late-ovulation. What I find is that long follicular phases often go together with short luteal phases, because I think that what happens is the hormones that grow the eggs are on a 28-day cycle, regardless of when we menstruate. So no issues with getting pregnant on a late cycle day. Like, my first son was conceived on cycle day 44, and I know many other women who have conceived with long follicular phases like that with no problems. Okay, I think I will answer some of the other questions personally to people, and because I need to get going. I hope you found this helpful, and again, if you don't already have my book, there's so much information in there. It's literally everything I know, except the few things that I've researched since then. And join my Facebook group, noperiod.info/support. I do have a Patreon page, patreon.com/noperiodnowwhat, if you feel like supporting me there. And like I said, I do work with women one-on-one. You can look at that at noperiod.info/consulting. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, evening, morning, whatever it happens to be, wherever you are. And I will do another one of these in a month or so. And yeah, that's it. Have a great day. Bye.